I feel like this episode has most oh my gods per minute than any episode yet, which is exciting. It's a new record for the show.
I'm honored. As I kept saying the information I wanted to tell you, I just see your face drop and I
Yeah.
see the mic slowly lower and I'm like, that's the exact same reaction I got from the students. So I'm like, good, good. I'm glad that I'm sharing this information, but also that's why I try to bring in optimism, positivity, because I know I'm smacking you in the face with some brutal, brutal truths.
I'm glad it's you smacking us in the face before it's the weapons themselves. So yeah, we gotta fucking stop this. Welcome back to War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war. My guest today is a lecturer at the Columbia Institute for the Study of Human Rights on modern developments in international arms control and the humanitarian implications of autonomous and AI weaponry, and conveniently lives next to a preschool. So if you hear some kids laughing in the background, that's important counterbalancing to the weight of this topic. Welcome, Ashley Gates.
Thank you so much for having me, Orly. It's a pleasure to be on.
Yes, now tell me just how autonomous are autonomous weapons?
Honestly, well, let's start with the fact that there is no agreed upon definition for autonomy. So everyone who's using this term, myself included, we don't entirely know what we're even saying. But like with most things, autonomy is a spectrum. So we've got we can break it into about three brackets. Something with humans in the loop. So humans are sending off something, they're making the final decision, they're shooting out a rocket, for example, and then the rocket does what it needs to do. A landmine, for example, is an autonomous weapon because you place it somewhere and then it'll blow up on its own. And so that's humans in the loop. They made the decisions. Then there's humans on top of the loop. They're witnessing the automation of a drone strike, for example, and they can stop it at any time. They can pause it, stop it, they can restart it. And then there's humans out of the loop. That's the one that's really of concern, where the moment the human approves the weapon, hands off. The weapon does what it wants to do, and it can go incredibly poorly. It can strike things inaccurately. So the answer is humans are still in control, but they can take their hands off of the steering wheel when they want to when it comes to some weapons.
And are all three forms currently in circulation, in use?
I would say yes. For example, the swarming drones that are used in the Ukraine and Russian war, they are a bit of a human on the loop situation where the humans kind of let them go and then the swarms of drones develop their own movements when they need to. With that being said, and this comes to accountability, which I talk about a lot in the lecture, no matter what, by the humans sending out something, they're still accountable. They made the decision to send it out. But there's nothing entirely without human oversight. If that oversight is actually viable oversight and not just a rubber stamp, that's another thing. But right now, there's still human review. And there's no robots making robots yet. That's a question that I get a lot in my lecture. It immediately moves to Black Mirror with the students, where they're like, so the robots are making robot weapons that have no control and we're all going to die. And I'm like, not yet, not yet.
So of the likelihood that we're all going to die, what do you think is the leading contender? Like, what's most likely to kill us right now?
I think the most likely thing to kill us right now, long term, of course, climate change. And as we add more AI when it comes to all of these like horrible data centers, that's going to speed up the process. But if we made nuclear weapons completely automated, that'd knock us out. I think that would be the most ridiculous decision to make. And that's been in consideration to move autonomous decision making and intelligence into our nuclear arsenal, the United States in particular. I think that would knock us out the quickest.
Wow. And so you mentioned accountability. Um, I feel like I have yet to see it in my lifetime. I grew up, hearing, I don't want to say fairy tales about the Nuremberg trials, but at least hearing about war crimes tribunals actually happening. I guess there was the Srebrenica one within this millennium, but what does accountability look like, either in theory or in practice?
Yes. So here is the crux of international law. Because, yeah, when I was doing my master's in international law, the Nuremberg tribunals and the Tokyo tribunals were just the hallmark,
Yeah.
the precipice, the dream of what could be for accountability. And even those were absolutely rigged. And frankly, in the Tokyo tribunal, everyone, the majority, besides like two generals who were hanged for their crimes, by the 50s, the US had reinstated all of those people back into the Japanese government
Oh my
for their
God.
own gain.
Did
So
they
even like, yeah,
did they even work for NASA?
no, that was all the Germans.
Yeah.
We brought the Germans over. I would say the main issue with international law and the international humanitarian law system is that it's based on state consent. And that means we need to have political will for accountability. And also when it comes to a really, when it comes to a lot of, unfortunately, when it comes to a lot of international humanitarian law, any sort of regulation on warfare, there needs to be a horrific atrocity in order for things to be closer to accountability. You probably won't see it in your lifetime unless there is a big change in political will. And right now, if it's in the international sphere, the permanent five members of the UN Security Council have to agree to it, with the US and Russia and China, and honestly, the UK and France being the permanent five. The United States, for example, is vehemently against any sort of regulation of AI, of drones, of autonomous lethal weapon systems in the military. And they will do anything in their power to ensure that Israel, who has used AI in their war in Gaza, will not be held accountable in any of the international systems, as Benjamin Netanyahu's arrest warrant just dangles out there. The actual likelihood of accountability is low. However, that's not, in my opinion, a reason to completely throw international law to the bin, like a lot of pessimists like to argue, which I understand, because at least we have something to hold on to and yell about. If there were no laws at all in the international sphere, we wouldn't even have something to protest about and argue about and maybe potentially use in the future for accountability. But that's not really going to stop the atrocities in the meantime. It's not really a place of big hope. It's it's the main crux of international law.
You mentioned, yes, AI use in Gaza. So what did that look like?
Yes. So from my conversations that I've had with former IDF soldiers, from my own reporting as a foreign affairs correspondent, and just my research over past roles, I know that the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, has been using artificial intelligence in some form since about 2015 or 2016. They weren't really interested in it until the October 7th attacks in 2023, when the war in Gaza really began. Once that happened, there was a huge effort to try to integrate artificial intelligence systems, which are really just large language models trained on a ton of evidence and data collected by the extreme surveillance that Israel has over the occupied areas of Gaza and the West Bank. And so, in the first couple months of the current war in Gaza, they started integrating a lot of the drone footage that they already had in the system because they have been surveying these people egregiously for many, many years using drones. They created multiple different AI tools. One of them is horribly named Where's Daddy? It would
Oi.
try to, yeah, it would try to track where potential men who may be connected to Hamas or another militant group in Gaza, where they slept at night. And so then they would bomb them at night at home, and they would track where their children are and where their spouses are. So then they would be able to bomb them at home while they were sleeping, which increased collateral damage extensively because you were actively bombing the civilians around them. That's not even the worst one. The worst one is Project Lavender. The Lavender targeting system generated, just in the first couple months, something like 35,000 potential men that could be targeted by IDF forces, by drone strikes, airstrikes, you name it. And one source in the Israeli military stated that human personnel often served only as a rubber stamp for the machine's decisions. They would normally only devote about 20 seconds to each target, to each person, before bombing them, just to make sure that the lavender marked target that AI generated was a male.
My God.
It's horrible. It's absolutely disgusting.
And there's so much in there, and I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but just learning about like the level at which people in Gaza were surveilled, it's hard to square with the fact that the Israeli government insists that October 7th took them by surprise. If they were so comprehensively surveilling people and knew their movements, then that's sus at the very least.
I agree. Another thing that's sus is that anytime, which rarely do they do any sort of accountability on their strikes, obviously, but when the Israeli military or the Israeli government does announce that, oh, we made a mistake, we messed up, we didn't mean to target that individual, this is the most heavily surveyed population in the world. They know exactly, they are doing biometrics, they are constantly drone surveillance from the ground, from sky. They know exactly what's going on in the Gaza Strip. None of these strikes were accidental. Every strike, especially double trap strikes, where they would come back and strike the exact same place after humanitarian officials, Red Cross officials would come in, and then they'd say, whoops, that's just impossible. That's something that comes up with the whole argument that, oh, adding AI into the military system is going to make it more difficult for accountability. Not particularly. It's just another smokescreen that a military or a government can hide behind and say, oh, it was the technology, not us. But it was still their decision to use that technology. So it's
And
just an excuse in the end.
And where does that original research come from? Like it has to come from a human, eh? That feeds the machine.
So what I know more about the US's system called Project Maven, but I know that basically they have thousands, let's just say in Israel, there's thousands of drones. They are constantly filming. And as they film, this information can be stored. Normally it is stored. The US, when it was first starting its AI system, realized it wasn't storing the majority of its data. And so they are storing it. And then that stored data is fed into a large language model. Sometimes that data is sent to a private company that they've partnered with that's developing this large language model. So it's already a little bit spliced up. And some of the more excruciating parts of the data aren't even used to train these models, so that private industry doesn't see it. Other times, they're just fed hours and hours of data. And it is a human decision to put this data into the model. And then they'll set up tests for the model to train it. This is Project Maven's knowledge that I'm working off of. For Project Maven, they put a ton of drone data from a lot of US activity against the Islamic State, against ISIS, into these models. And they'd be like, okay, model, find a white Toyota. And they would feed more and more data into this model until it could accurately pinpoint where a white Toyota was. And so now when the US government uses Project Maven, which reports have found that they're absolutely using it in Iran because they generated they generated so many strikes in the first 24 hours, more than humans ever could, that they're likely using AI in their systems. But it basically looks as if once all of that drone data is put into the system, then they're shown a map of all of these little white dots. And little white dots are on a person. And the AI system is saying, well, maybe this person could be a civilian. Maybe this person could potentially be a target on homes, on cars, on buses, on airplanes, on tiny little black dots that may or may not be a gun. It just feeds a ridiculous amount of data to these once drone operators, now sometimes transferred into like AI review people that decide based on the information fed to them by this system whether or not to strike.
Oh my God. Yeah, one of the many things that I've learned like in the course of doing this podcast is I'm gonna say the new Spider-Man movie anyway, but like this is ruining superhero movies for me. What you're describing like sounds like something like that was in the Iron Man movie in 2008, but that was never instructions. That was never like, hey, we should take this technology and make it exist in real life. Like you're describing the Batcave.
I'm describing the Batcave. I'm describing Tony Stark's suit that's like literally talking to
Yeah.
him in a stupid British accent and like showing him all of these data points. Yeah. Yeah, they took that and ran with it. It's like with Jurassic Park, how these scientists keep trying to
Right.
bring back dinosaurs. And it's like this was not an instruction manual. This was a lesson on human folly. And they're like, what if we bring them back though?
Are there any other things from fiction that have now become real that you've encountered in your research?
This is such a niche grab. I don't know what your elementary school or middle school curriculum was, but we had to read a book called Ender's Game.
We didn't, but I've heard of it.
Ender's Game is basically they make these really smart children who are really good at like this video game the children think that they are playing a video game for the military and they're killing all of these things in the game, and there's also like, weird middle school relationship drama, but they're mainly like they're killing things in a video game. And then Ender, who's like the best at killing, realizes that the whole time they've been using things that kind of are like remote control play toys, and they are actually killing an entire alien species. And
Wow.
he like meets the aliens, has like an egg of the aliens, and like realizes empathy and tries to shut the whole thing down. If we want to start talking about drones, most drone manufacturers talk to video game developers, and they use the same kind of headsets and tools and controllers that people who are really good at video games often already use. And the military loves to go to like video game competitions and try to reel the boys and girls in with any sort of benefits that it can be like, you can use these tools to fly drones for us tomorrow.
My God. It's even, yeah, darker than I even imagined. They give these projects like whimsical names. Like, where did the Project Lavender and Project Maven come from?
I have no idea. I believe Maven is an acronym. I don't know where lavender came from, which is like it's a soothing essential oil that's and it's been used to probably kill tens of thousands of
My
men.
God. And so that, yeah, superhero movies are ruined. The song Lavender Haze by Taylor Swift is ruined. Literally now I can never hear Taylor Swift saying a lavender haze sneaking up on me and like not think of impending
Not think of it as IDF
drones.
drone.
Oh, brutal. Um, Throughout the course of your research, what's something that's surprised you the most or something you didn't see coming?
That's a good question. I think the scope and the scale, like the fact that Gaza is the first AI war and already it is being developed and implemented as much as humanly or machinely possible, was terrifying. And when this most recent US-Israeli-Iran war broke out, the which happened right before taught one of my first lectures, there was about 1,000 targets struck by the United States military in Iran in the first 24 hours of what they called, again, a horrible name, Operation Epic Fury.
All right.
And I realized in real time we're witnessing a development in warfare. Like I'm sitting here and we've already been through enough history, I think, as this generation. And I'm like, oh, war is quote unquote autonomous now and artificial. But really it's just increased in speed. It hasn't increased its accuracy. It is being seen as, or being discussed by the United States, an example, as like the future of war, and we need to implement like AI into everything. It's just a large language model that's being dressed up as some sort of new weapon, as some sort of nuclear bomb, when it's just like a system that can be just as biased as any other technology, just as stupid as any other technology that humans develop. And it's being just held and revered. What also really pissed me off is how far away the United Nations system is to any sort of semblance of international regulation of autonomous weaponry. We're not even near the stages of right now. They are doing conferences in which they're hopefully thinking that these conferences may lead in the future to a discussion that may lead to the development of some sort of international regulation. We are so far behind as it's already being implemented into wars right in front of us. So I think just like the starkness of the reality is what surprised me the most, which is not a sunny answer.
Wow. Do we think these like our tech overlords, do they actually think that chatbots are revolutionary technology? Like I grew up on AOL. I remember like talking to Smarter Child. Like, do they actually think that this is world-changing stuff, or they're just embellishing its importance to try to get investors?
If I was to put money down, I would say they're embellishing because not only is this creating a less safe war that is just a type of warfare that is faster, more deadly to civilians. That's not really benefiting anyone except those who manufacture AI, which happen to be a lot of like the big Silicon Valley tech tycoons. And their stocks depend on everyone thinking that this is the greatest new hit. This is the best thing since sliced bread. When so much of the US economy, for example, has now hedged its bet on AI. So they better act as though that this AI is the next big thing, or it could actually burst the United States economy.
Oh my God.
And all of these data centers that are being developed right now, normally in uh, lands that were once protected, normally on or near Native American lands or lands of people who already are struggling within the current economic system that we have. They're creating these giant data centers all over the United States, and they're attempting to do some in the Gulf, but that's kind of been paused since the war. But they're going to be gigantic, take up so much of the residential electric grid's power. They run only on fresh water. So you can't even use salt water. So they're going to be taking up water, they're going to be taking up land, electricity, which is already going to raise electricity bills and increase global warming, which leads to climate change. And the United States has hedged its bet on AI. And so it better work, but I also think it's ridiculous. It hallucinates. If you talk to like ChatGPT, it will say whatever you want it to say to you. And what's actually freaked me out the most that has nothing to do with the military is that I'm on the subway in New York and I'm seeing multiple people having like relationships with ChatGPT.
No.
Oh,
I
because I love to creep on people in subways. I'm
That's
looking at
part of
what
the
other
fun.
people are
Yeah.
doing on their phones. And I have seen at least 3 separate times of men. I've only seen men. Women could be doing this, but I've seen men talking to ChatGPT being like, "You mean so much to me. Thank you for saying this to me." Like, and it that has scared me the most out of anything. I'm seeing people develop relationships with ChatGPT, which will say whatever the hell you want it to.
My gosh. And they don't even say that to human women. So that men are capable of saying, I appreciate you. They just can only say it to robots who tell them exactly what they want to hear.
Exactly. They only say it to machines that are literally going to be like, you're the smartest, most brilliant man in the world. So I think honestly, what may kill us, since we're already declining birth weight, like wise, so I've heard, if they put that chat GPT into a sex robot,
My God. Yeah. Again, the movie Her with Scarlett Johansson
the movie her.
was not was not a pitch deck. So you mentioned political will and teaching students. So is there like hope in maybe the next generation building the political will and wanting to live on a hospitable planet?
I think that, okay, let me be optimistic real quick.
Okay,
I
word.
think our own generation, I think the generation above us and the generation below us, the majority of people want to live on a hospitable planet. They want to live on a planet that is safe, that is healthy, that has birds chirping. And I think it is a elite few individuals who are currently in power or in office that do not want this. But I think the majority of people, even now, even older than us and younger than us too, like they're terrified, but they want a better world. And I know a lot of people within like the corporate and technological spheres, they're having to integrate AI into their workplace because their workplaces are forcing them to do so. And so it's kind of against their own will in that regard and just the day to day. And when it comes to political will, I think what needs to be fought against is this defeatism. Because, yeah, I know I just was talking about some of the most horrible and horrific things I've ever learned about. But as humans, we've survived through a lot worse. And there has been some sort of remediation, accountability. Enough people have screamed in order to get things done many times before in history. I'll give you an example. Back in 1899, there was a convention to ban something called dum-dum bullets. They were developed and produced by the British Empire, and they were named after the place in India in which they were produced. And the bullet would just explode inside of someone to create as much shrapnel in their body as possible and just like mandate disability, mandate human suffering. Now, back in the day, no internet, no phones. Initially, reports came from doctors on the ground being like, so this is just a horrible weapon that's actually not benefiting you militarily, and it's just causing unnecessary and superfluous human suffering. And then peace activists got together in organizations internationally and started signing petitions in different countries and within the British Empire signing petitions. And then there came many years later the conference in 1899, which banned dum-dum bullets. They stopped being used, even though they were used all over. And the same thing with the Geneva Conventions in 1945. Yes, did it take two world wars for them to appear? Unfortunately. But sometimes in the long, shut line of human history, after horrible things happen, people do come together. Peace activists have been around for longer than the United States has even existed. There's always been strong movements in no matter what technological realm that we are in. Like there was a time when the Industrial Revolution was going to destroy everything and be terrifying. We adapted. And there's still been peace activism and movements in these non-governmental organizations that have sprouted and grown and advocated. We have the anti-personal landmine treaty, where landmines have been eradicated in many different countries. And there's been massive cleanup movements that have been international, that have cleaned up, for example, Bosnia and Herzegovina after 30 years it took. They cleaned it up. There's also the cluster munition treaty. We're not shooting, not everyone, but the majority of the world isn't shooting cluster munitions that explode everywhere and killed civilians unnecessarily on wars anymore. We've got conventions that stop the use of biological toxins and weapons, stop the use of chemical weapons. We don't use blinding lasers on people. And all of these were hard fought decisions that started at the grassroots movement and did get political support even when, horrible dictators were in power, even when fascists were in power. There's always room for progress. And so I think already volleying it to the next generation, some of the strongest peace activists I know are in their near 80s, and they're still kicking ass and taking names. And so I think that they're in the face of horrible atrocity, which I think humankind has always been in the face of horrifying atrocity. There's no end to history. There's always hope.
Thank you. I really needed to hear that. And it's interesting. I wonder if the automation of war can backfire in terms of its like popularity or its sellability. I feel like so much about l- like what governments and Hollywood even use to sell us on war is like stories of personal heroism and triumphs and sacrifice. But there's no narrative if it's automated, right?
Absolutely. And I'm really glad that you bring that up because so much of war already has to be sold. It's a brutal endeavor that normally brings a person either to death or to be horribly changed, suffering PTSD for the rest of their days. It's a horrible system. So it has been basically hand fed to the general public by I've done a report on this, and Marvel in particular, they're kind of bought and paid for by the Department of Defense. And this has been going on since Captain America was first created, very early days. I think like during World War II, his first scene was him like, I don't know, punching Hitler in the face. We've always had to sell it. And back when there were horses in war, it was such a powerful moment for people who were just like on a horse, being really heroic, because that's what they'd seen as heroism in plays and movies and those sort of things. And that was honestly an issue when I bring up horses randomly, because that was an issue when the military changed from horses to tanks in like the 1800s, 1900s. Initially, the governments were terrified because they're like, horses are such a symbol of strength and masculinity and nationalism. These tanks are nothing. What are we going to do? And so they're like, okay, we're going to make a PR move. Then now the tank and being in there with your it's an incredibly masculine thing, war. Being in there with your fellow men, sweaty and rough and raw in this like little tank that you're driving is just so incredibly patriotic. So I do think it's going to backfire. One, it's becoming less attractive. This war in Iran is one of the least domestically supported wars that the United States has ever fought, and that includes Vietnam. After they found out what was going on in Vietnam, it's not popular because it's just the destruction of civilian infrastructure, and there's no men with their boots on the ground, like fighting for American patriotism. Also, it's difficult when your military leader is so wishy washy. Is the Strait of Hormuz a necessary thing for America to secure, or does it have anything to do with us? Because the rhetoric is not lining up. When things move quicker, I guess there are, of course, military benefits to being able to strike faster. The use of autonomous weaponry and artificial intelligence, there are many proponents that say they won't have the issue of humans being exhausted or humans being stressed out. And if it's used correctly, maybe it can even benefit civilians and give us more information to work with when we strike. The wars in Gaza and Iran, which are the first ever AI wars, are not really showing evidence towards the idea that this is going to support civilians and make war fighting better. It's, as unfortunately named, the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, is saying that it increases the lethality of war. That's not heroic. That's not really patriotic either. And I don't think there's going to be that many fun movies about a ton of men in, I don't know, some sort of dark office somewhere watching a screen of people being blown up. I just don't think that can really sell to the public in the same way. So I'm glad you bring that up. I think that will be an issue moving forward.
Yeah, I don't think not even Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks can like make a bunch of dudes in a basement in like Syracuse, right? Where are these drones fired off?
Yeah, these drones are fired off. Some of them are fired off from places in the States. Some of them are fired off from some of the um, US military compounds around the Gulf that have been struck by Iran in the most recent rendition of the Israeli US war on Iran. Obviously, we don't know exactly where these things are being shot up, but any sort of US CENTCOM base, because we have one regionally, that's normally where the drone headquarters are being found. And because it's now so connected by Wi Fi technology, they can be doing this from anywhere. I can't tell you exactly where they're doing it, but they could be doing it from Poughkeepsie. Like they
Wow.
could be doing it from anywhere they choose. And so it also takes away, I don't know, like I heard many reports of men who had fought in Vietnam going back to Vietnam after and kind of like trying to reconcile with what they'd done. I don't think they're even going to need to do that either. But what I do know is that even though everything is on a screen, it's still impacting these people. It is still impacting these people because they're just clicking a button and they often know that when they decide on a strike, that's killing someone. And when these strikes go wrong, especially when the United States used to have some sort of semblance of accountability within their military for civilian casualties, which has been eradicated in this most recent administration, that could cause someone's job. Now it's not really much of an issue, but they can be doing this from anywhere. And they're normally just in some sort of dark room, staring at a screen for about 12 to 24 hours in a row. It's not sexy.
Yeah, the fact that some of the same technology I use to record War is Stupid and anti-war podcasts about war, like Wi-Fi and computers, are used for said war is wild. And you mentioned yeah, the current war in Iran. What do we know about the Minab school bombing? So it's interesting. It's been hard to sell this war in that the opening salvo was literally on elementary school, and there were reports that it was bad. It was Claude's fault that it like Anthropic or something had bad technology, thought it was a military asset, but no, it was an elementary school. Is that the story?
So they say the United States military says that they are doing some sort of investigation on it. There's little chance that that investigation will actually come to anything public. From the latest reporting that I've seen, it wasn't AI's fault. It was actually worse than that. It was human decision makers relying on data that they knew was not accurate and they knew that was old, but still firing anyway. They hit that primary school in Nomab twice, two times, killing roughly 190 girls, most of them between the ages of 7 and 12. And it wasn't even artificial intelligence, it wasn't even autonomous weapon systems. It was likely humans using data that they knew that was wrong, but being told by their superiors, shoot anyways. And that's something that I am glad that you brought up, that I think there's a potential concern in the future, in the near future, now that AI is being advertised so much in military, that a lot of things can be potentially, a lot of horrible civilian atrocities, war crimes may potentially be blamed on AI. AI is just a tool. It is just a tool used by a greater system. It is still the human's decision to strike, even if they just rubber stamp what's given. Like it is still, so in the end, I don't even think it was Claude in this regard. Maybe new reporting will come out. I think it was human decision making there.
And has humans' ability to be held accountable been tested yet, or it's all still new? Like, has anyone been taken to court, or that's years down the line?
Unfortunately, I think that's years down the line. There's arrest warrants out, but the International Criminal Court, which, if we're talking about the international system of um, any sort of accountability or regulation, which is where my expertise lies, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, is supposed to be the pinnacle of accountability for genocide, atrocity, war crimes, the worst of humanity. Right now, it is absolutely suffering under a myriad of sanctions imposed by the United States government. It was already before then struggling for funding and struggling for resources, and it doesn't have the best track record for getting good, just being able to hold leaders accountable. It only also holds the most high up the leaders of countries accountable. So I think at the current state, we're years off. There may be potential new options. The law is always evolving at the domestic, multinational, and international level. I don't know if there's been actions by those who suffered from these strikes, most recent strikes. Maybe groups can attempt to sue the United States military, which is a difficult thing because they have, you know, a bulwark of lawyers on their end. But it's not impossible. Accountability isn't impossible. The system that we're set up in right now, and especially one where it is actually sanctioning and blacklisting the international level accountability mechanism for human rights atrocities, not really looking good. Not really looking good, but not impossible. There's some incredible lawyers out there and non governmental organizations that have sued the US military for the drone strikes that they've done on civilian properties. A group called Civic comes to mind. They try to sue the US government and legally haggle with the US government to get some sort of remediation for those who have suffered at the hands of US military strikes. These organizations are not getting the funding they deserve. They are fighting against juggernauts, but they exist. And as I said before, like there's always opportunities for some sort of accountability. The idea of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu being actually held accountable at the International Criminal Court, probably not going to happen. But lower level actions can occur and political leadership changes. It means that patience needs to be brought in as we watch atrocities happen before our eyes. But the future is unpredictable. We don't know what can happen in the future.
It's interesting. We're watching atrocities happen to other people, which people are either cheering on or willing to endure. But will the atrocities happen to us? Like, who else has this technology? If it's so easy to launch drones and blow up an elementary school from far away, are there people who would want to do that to the United States or everywhere?
That is why it is so important to have some sort of regulation on warfare. Because the moment that you start bombing an elementary school, you're you're a combatant. You're the other side of whatever battle that you're fighting is going to also think that it's okay to bomb an elementary school. If you start bombing civilian infrastructure, water salination, water filtration, hospitals, then other actors in the military realm internationally and domestically will think that it's okay to be doing the exact same thing. That is why the Geneva Convention set up the international humanitarian legal system, where there was supposed to be and mandates distinction between civilian objects and military objects. Because if you start bombing civilian objects, why wouldn't someone do the exact same thing to you? And that's where all of these horrible atrocities, specifically in Gaza, and also now the amount of civilian infrastructure being targeted around the entire Middle Eastern region, now with the war in Iran revved back up and many different civilian sites in different countries being struck, the tit for tat is more easily thought of by military commanders as a smart decision because if they're going to target that of us, we can target that of them and we should. And so it's then just creates this race to the bottom. And also autonomous AI data, it can be used for domestic policing as well. The US police force in particular gets a lot of weaponry and intelligence and training from the US military. I don't think if they haven't already started using their surveillance data into AI systems, I don't think that's very far off. So not only could a country's own atrocities against another fall right back on them, But also, it can happen from the domestic side as well. Anything, for example, that the United States does abroad, it's often a training ground for what they may do back at home if they, for example, are under a system that craved security and order more than democracy.
Are there any campaigns or organizations doing the work that you want to shout out or recommend people plug into?
I want to shout out Stop Killer Robots. It has a sick name. When we're talking about weird names, this is a cool one. Stop
Hell
Killer
yeah.
Robots. Been a international multi-organizational group that has basically taken a huge amount of organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and also countries that are in support of this. Ireland, Norway, those sort of countries come to mind, in which it is an international organization that is trying to put steep regulations on all of this. They want to ban AI in war. They want to ensure that any sort of drone situation that becomes autonomous is not allowed, and so that there's strict guidelines on basically warfare being used. Let me rephrase. I would want to say that Stop Killer Robots is an incredible organization that is the forefront of advocacy on trying to regulate autonomous weaponry, autonomous drone usage, AI, and warfare. They do great work. They're huge, and they have a ton of different more domestic groups. There's a US version, there's a UK version, I believe there's an India version, like Stop Killer Robots rocks. Also, I will say in June, 100 or so states gathered in Geneva for a very informal UN exchange on the military domain and AI in the military domain. But during that June Geneva meeting, there was a joint declaration signed by about 220 different organizations, including Amnesty International and religious groups like the World Council of Churches. And they called for a complete ban of AI in warfare. They said, and I'm quoting right now because I think it's a good quote, such technologies dilute human responsibility in life and death decisions. They may help conceal international crimes behind a veneer of apparent algorithmic objectivity while simultaneously evading accountability. And so that's
Yeah, bars. That's from
hard.
the church?
Listen, Pope Leo's Magnifica Humanitas, he called for the world to disarm AI. Like there's some good work being done. That's over 200 organizations already banding together to try to regulate this. So I would definitely look up Stop Killer Robots. There's a ton of intersectional multinational groups working together to try to scream at their governments to regulate this before it becomes too late. And there's a lot of good work always being done, even in the face of the most horrendous atrocities.
Thank you. There's work that needs to be done, but there's work already being done, and it's as easy as anyone to just plug in. Um, you don't need to be the Pope. You can just uplift his program. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, oh man, I feel like this episode has most oh my gods per minute than any episode yet, which is exciting. It's a new record for the show.
I'm honored. As I kept saying the information I wanted to tell you, I just see your face drop and I
Yeah.
see the mic slowly lower. And I'm like, that's the exact same reaction I got from the students. So I'm like, good. I'm glad that I'm sharing this information, but also that's why I try to bring in optimism, positivity, because I know I'm smacking you in the face with some brutal, brutal truths.
I'm glad it's you smacking us in the face before it's the weapons themselves. So yeah, we gotta fucking stop this.
Yeah, we got to stop this. And we
And
can stop this.
it's been stopped before, eh?
It's
Yeah,
been stopped before. Weapons that have been used on every single battlefield have been banned. It's been possible. It's happened before. Unfortunately, sometimes it happens right after atrocity. But
the good
stranger
news
things.
is Yeah, and the good news is we have the atrocities.
We have the evidence. We have the
Yeah,
atrocity. We don't need to do any more, guys. We have enough. Like, thank you.
we don't have to
Let's
wait. It's there. It's
no.
happened.
Let's get to work on banning this.
Thank you. And where can people find you or your work if people want to read your reporting and writing?
I have not a good answer to this. I think my LinkedIn may be my best.
Excellent. Yeah.
My LinkedIn, you can find me on LinkedIn at Ashley Gate. Right now, I'm a foreign affairs correspondent for a lovely Substack called Foreign Exchanges, run by Derek Davidson. And if you just happen to be studying human rights at Columbia University, you may see me there.
Incredible. Roar, lion, roar.
Roar, lion, roar. I will say, I do love to talk about the atrocities that the Israeli government is doing as much as possible while I'm on campus in Columbia.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure it makes you popular with the students, if not the administration.
If
Yeah,
not the administration, but what can you do?
exactly. We're all, yeah. Um, Thank you. Thank you so much. And
Thank you for having me on, Orly. This has been wonderful.
thank you for listening and or watching War is Stupid, an anti-war podcast about war. Please subscribe, rate and review, tell your dads. We'll see you next time.